Welcome to our introductory course for JavaScript. Within this course, I'm going to show you how to apply JavaScript into your HTML document. And the good thing about JavaScript is you can literally write JavaScript anywhere. You don't need any special compilers, and you can output it as long as you have a browser that can output that content. So there's a number of different ways that you can access and write JavaScript. So right now, open on the screen, I have Adobe Brackets. So this is a free open source editor that you can go and you can download yourself as well. And it allows you to create web files, HTML, JavaScript files, and so on. So with JavaScript, there are a number of options. All you need is a browser to run your JavaScript code, and you can place it right within your HTML code. So we're going to be showing you all of that within this course. There are also other options such as websites like CodePen.io, where you can actually go in, type some HTML, type some CSS, and type some JavaScript and have it show up right away within the right-hand side here viewing area. So that was that alert showing up, and we can see as I'm typing it in, the JavaScript actually renders out and runs the code here. So the JavaScript file is actually attached into the HTML and CSS on CodePen.io. So throughout this course, I'm going to be showing you all the amazing things that JavaScript can do. JavaScript is everywhere. It's really popular, and it's actually really easy to start using JavaScript and adding it into your HTML and CSS projects. JavaScript provides that layer of interactivity and updates the user experience, allowing the web developers to customize that experience and get input and interaction from the users. So when you're ready, we're going to start coding JavaScript. Let's begin. One of the simplest pieces of code is what I was showing in the previous lecture. It's these pop-up dialog windows. And that's a simple way for you to be able to communicate with your web users. So I'm going to open up Adobe Brackets, and I'm going to actually add some JavaScript. So right now I have a default HTML5 template, and I'm going to add some JavaScript up here in the head section, just beneath the metadata. And the way that we add JavaScript, so there are a number of ways to add JavaScript into your web pages, and we're going to be going over those throughout the course as well. So one of the most common ways is just opening and closing script tags, and anything in between here is going to be JavaScript. So if you're familiar with HTML, this is going to be the same type of format where the browser comes, it reads through all of the HTML code. When it hits the script tag, it understands that this content in here is now JavaScript, and it reads through that JavaScript, and then afterwards it renders out that content that's available within the JavaScript. So one of the most simplest ways is these dialog boxes, and it's really simple. They've got these built-in functions or methods, and we're going to talk about that later on in the course as well, what they are. So for now, it's just important to understand that the window, when it renders out, it's got a whole bunch of these built-in functions, and one of them is the alert function. And a function is just a piece of code predefined, and the browser actually understands what it's supposed to do. So when it hits alert, it knows that alert is formatted in a way that this is a dialog that's going to open up, and that quoted area in the middle here is going to be the content that it's going to place within that alert. So let's go back out to our web page and show you what that looks like. So all it is this dialog box, and you can't actually click on anywhere else within your browser, so it locks access to the rest of the browser until you hit that OK. So this is going to be for the user, requiring that user to make interaction with this pop-up dialog box, because at this point the JavaScript is preventing the rest of the web page from rendering out any additional content, and also preventing the user from interacting unless they're actually clicking the OK, and then they're free to go through and use their browser again. So that's one of the simplest ways to create some user interaction, and although that's probably not the most pleasant user interaction that we can deliver, it's just a really good simple example of what JavaScript can do, and it's a good starting point for this course implementing JavaScript code. So I would encourage you to go over to a website such as CodePen, or open up Notepad, or whatever editor that you have available. You can even use TextPad. Most computers will have a default editing software where you can just create files and save them as either HTML files, and then open them up within your browser and render out those alerts. So all you really need to do is add that into your HTML with the script tags and do something like alert and type in your own custom message. In the next lesson, we're going to be diving deeper into what JavaScript can do, because this is just scratching the surface. There's so much that's available for JavaScript. Possibilities are literally endless and limitless availability of what you can do once you start writing JavaScript code. So that's all coming up in the next lessons. So we've added in some JavaScript code, and what we've done over here is we've added it within the web page. And there are some disadvantages of doing it this way. So this is what's called inline JavaScript. So this is actually placed within your HTML page. There also is another option, which is probably the more preferred option when you're writing JavaScript, and that's actually linking to external scripts. So I'm going to create that link to an external script, and we started out the same where we do script, and here we have to indicate what type it is. So it's always a good idea to help the browser out and understand what type of content it should be expecting from this source, and then we just do source. So if you are familiar with HTML, this is going to be really easy to understand that we're adding in code in this type of fashion. So here all we have to do is link to the correct file location. So much like when you're making hyperlinks, or if you're sourcing out an image within your HTML, you make sure that you do have the correct path to where the JavaScript file is housed. And now I can actually take this and open up my scripts. So I'm going to just close that menu. It's not relevant for this course. And I'm just going to empty out scripts file and start brand new. So here I've got an alert. So basically I just copied and pasted over what I had between the script tag, and notice when I'm linking to script.js, so the extension is .js, so this is indicative of JavaScript files, and also I don't have to include these script tags anymore, because since it understands that this is a JavaScript file, it understands that it's taking that content directly out of JavaScript and bringing it in between the script tags. So it's essentially doing the same thing. So I go out to my website and I do the refresh of the page. I get the exact same pop-up box that we had earlier. Now I'm just going to hit OK and add one other bit of content into this lecture. That we see here that we've placed the JavaScript at the top of the page, and usually best practices is actually to place it just below the body tag closing, and there's actually several reasons for that. So one of the reasons that we're placing it in the body and just below the body closes is that if we do have any errors with the script file, or if it takes long to load, then we could have some loading issues. So we want to always make sure web pages load as quickly as possible. So this is why we're placing it at the bottom. So it basically speeds up the downloading process. And secondly, also because we want to have the ability to directly manipulate the DOM. So the DOM is the document object model. So that's everything contained within the web page code. And with JavaScript, you actually have access to all these different elements in HTML, and you can manipulate them. And the idea for the DOM is that you actually want the HTML to load, and then once it's loaded in, then you could use JavaScript to get access to all those various elements and do your manipulation. So you want all of those elements to load in first and then try to get access to them. So the order is important when you're looking at how code gets rendered out. So same thing with HTML and CSS, the order is important, how you present and where you present the code. So that's why best practices is link to an external file, JavaScript file, and also place it just before you close off the body tag. So when it comes to structuring your JavaScript, and I'm actually going to remove this out and I'm going to place my JavaScript in here now, and this is just for the purposes of this course because it's just easier to read, so I don't have to flip through several different files, so I can keep everything within that one index.html file. So in this lesson we're going to cover off JavaScript structure. So within JavaScript, when we defined variables and values, so if I was to define a as 1 and if I define a equals 1, so my question to you is, are these going to be the same? So essentially what is the value of a? So if I do a lowercase a, I want to find out what the value of it is. Are they actually going to, is this one overriding that one, or are we able to display that out? So one of the tools that I usually use on a regular basis in order to output content for my website is, or when I'm actually doing development work, is console log. And this is a really useful tool, and especially with Chrome it has a really good web dev tool. And we'll notice that when we're writing out JavaScript, unless we tell it to actually render something out onto the page, we're not going to see what JavaScript is doing. So it can do any number of calculations in the background and so on. So one of the things that I do want to do is I want to use my web dev tools and open up the console. So this is where that console log is sending through that message. And going back to that initial question, what's the value of lowercase a? So lowercase a is going to be 1, as we saw within our console. So we get that output there. When we click on this, we see console log is the one that's outputting that. And the reason for this is that JavaScript is case sensitive. So a is not equal to uppercase a. And this is going to be an important thing to remember when you're writing out your JavaScript, that you do have to be cognizant of the fact that it is case sensitive. So if you have a really long word and if you have some uppercase letters and lowercase letters, it might actually get confusing. So if you do something like A, B, so these, again, these are going to be different values because of the case sensitivity, and this comes into the idea when you are actually creating your values and your variables that you're going to be using to always to make sure that you do differentiate them and that you don't end up with something like this that could actually get confusing once you have a whole bunch of code and you see Apple AB. Sometimes you can overlook the fact that you're not, the case isn't the same. So try to keep that naming convention there, and it's important to make note of that. So one of the things with JavaScript as well, extra indents, line breaks, spaces, JavaScript ignores all that extra white space. So always try to make sure that your code is more readable. So you can actually do something like this and it's going to be the same thing as we had before. And sometimes you also want to compress your code. So this is what's called minifying your code, and this helps with load times. And there's a whole bunch of editors online where you can go minify code. So I'll just show you one of those now. I just went to JS compress, and there are a whole ton of these. So I'm going to actually break this out with all of that additional white space. Copy this, and this actually isn't going to work. It's going to throw an error because I changed the variable. But we're also going to talk about that in the upcoming lesson. So here I believe we just press compress, and we see that it removes out all of that additional white space. So this is a minified file, and this is going to run the same way. It's going to mean the same thing as that previous version. It's just minified. So white space is ignored. It's more for readability that we have that white space in there. And for readability, brackets has this built-in beautify, so it allows you to reformat your code so it's, again, more readable. Adding in comments in JavaScript, so there's several different ways to add in comments. So if you had one line of comments, and if you have multiple lines of comments, then you could do it this way with slash, asterisk, and then asterisk slash, and everything here is ignored. So everything within here is going to be ignored. And the reason for commenting, it doesn't actually do anything, nothing gets rendered out in the code, but the reason that we comment, again, this is for readability, for when you come back into your code maybe 6 months down the line, and you want to make sure that you understand what all of these values are doing. So you might want to do something like apple baby is the number of apples I ate, or something like that. And so this, which might not make sense down the line, 6 months down the line, but if you do have this comment and you open up your code and you're reading through this, you read through your comments and you say, okay, well, this is why I called it apple AB, because it's numbers of apples I've been eating, and so this makes sense that I'm doing whatever calculations I'm doing. Also here, you can add some additional instructions. If you're error checking or if you've done some updates, you can always comment those updates in. Also, one of the other things with JavaScript is to make sure that you've got the semicolons. So semicolons are required at the end of each code statement. So here, when we minified it, it actually commented before we did have the two semicolons, and that's because this is now considered one code statement where I'm defining variables. So this is equivalent to doing it this way. It's just a whole lot shorter. And notice here that I've always got these semicolons, and this is for the browser when it's rendering out the JavaScript to understand that, okay, well, this was one piece of code, this is the next, and it splits it out with the semicolons. And because this isn't minified, it's readable by the human eye, but it's going to be the same thing when it hits the minifier and everything gets compressed together without removing all of that white space. Then it's actually not going to be readable, and that's where the semicolons completely make sense, because you do need to have these in place. So in the next lesson, we're going to talk more about different types of values. So we saw here that we used variables, and this was a very basic use of variables. And you're going to find that throughout using JavaScript, variables are going to be one of those essential pieces of your coding logic, that variables are really going to save you time, and it's also going to help make that code dynamic. So we're going to be discussing that in the upcoming lesson and a whole lot more. So in the previous lesson, we had talked about setting these literal values. So these are what's known as literals. And this basically means that we're setting a fixed value, which is going to, now it's going to equal that apple AB is going to be equal to 1. So it's indefinitely, whenever we're accessing and calling this value within our code, it's going to actually retain a value of 1. And we can use any number of these identifiers in order to hold values. And there's a lot of different types of literals. So what we're looking at now are just numerics. So these are integers. They hold a value, a numeric value to that identifier. So whenever we're calling to there, we hold the value of 1. There's also commonly our strings. So I can just call strings, strings, and these are indicative of quoted items. So these are a bunch of characters strung together. You could add in white space and a whole bunch more. And now whenever I look up apple AB, I'm going to see that it actually contains that new value, strings, white space. So there are some naming conventions. Just to finish off with these literals, so we can have any number of literals. We can have arrays as literals, we can have objects as literals, and commonly we are using objects and arrays quite often. So I'm going to quickly run through those. And as well, there can also be Boolean values. So I'm just going to call this one boo. And so Boolean values are either true or false. So those are indicated with a 1 and a 0. And mainly we're using Booleans for conditional statements. And as well, we're going to be talking about that in upcoming lessons. So I don't want to get too far ahead with what we're discussing in regards to JavaScript. So this is what's known as a Boolean. And it can either be true or... So I'm just typing here on an angle, so that's why I'm adding in all these extra characters that I was hitting. So this one here is an int. And then this one is a string. So I'm going to run through some of the common types. So we have another one that's an object. So this is how you define an object, and we notice that they all look the same here in the beginning, and it's just what our actual value is going to be. So these identifiers can all be they can all be formatted in the same way, and we're also going to talk about what's available for formatting here. So you don't want to name set a variable and then set something else with that same variable value, because what that's going to do is that's actually going to overwrite the value. So with objects, we have what's called a paired value. So we have a name or a key, and then we have an identifier. So I'm just going to put John, and we can add in a number of different objects here. So we could have our email or something like that. And notice that these are the same way that we're presenting strings. So if we can also have integers and booleans within our objects. So I'm just going to quickly write something out here and maybe do something like age and then set that equal to 20. And so on. So we can keep adding them indefinitely, separating them via comma, and then when we're done, all we have to do is end that curly bracket. And then lastly, so this one here, just to keep consistent here, so that's an object. And then lastly, the other common one is an array. So I'm going to call it my array. And you set the arrays with the square brackets. So similar to objects where you can list a bunch of items in there. And then they're just comma separated. And the same thing with the strings and the characters. And you're probably wondering, okay, well what happens, so I saw what happened here when I output this in the console, but what happens when I output an object? What happens when I output an array? Just show you what these outputs actually look like within the console. So when I refresh it, we see that the object gets output, we get all the values listed there, and the same thing with the array, we get all those values listed there. And it's defined and listed as an object. So getting back into what our rules are for creating these identifiers, so they can start with any letter. They can actually start with a $ as well. So you could do something like that. They can start with an underscore. They can start with any one of those characters, but they can't start with numbers, so it goes green, because that's going to throw an error. And the reason for that is because, as we saw here, the numbers aren't quoted. So you have to always be careful when you are naming things, because you could run into some issues. It might think that it's a number. It looks at the first character there and it sees a number and it thinks that that's a number, but then it hits an A, and that makes absolutely no sense, and it'll throw an error for there. When you're naming it, upper, lowercase, any one of those letters from the alphabet are okay. And also, no other odd characters are allowed, so you can't do something like asterisk. So you definitely can't do something like and. And as well, there's one other thing to keep in mind. You can't do values that actually are defined values within JavaScript. So I can't do variable console or something like that, because that's going to actually conflict with the reserved words. So keep in mind that we can't do that, but we can do the dollar signs in that. So quite a lot what we can do, some things that we can't do. And then this is an example of all the different literals that, not all the different literals, but the common literals that are being used on a regular basis. So I encourage you to take a look through these, maybe go over to CodePen, try them out, see what you can get to happen. So I'm going to just list these within CodePen, get rid of that one. I can tidy it up as well within CodePen, so really cool. And we don't actually see anything happening, so I can open up a console here within CodePen. And also I can open up the browser console as well, and I see that I've got all of this information gets listed out here from the console log, and then I can work with that as well. So in the next lesson, we're going to dive even deeper into how to use JavaScript. So these are the basics, and you should definitely understand all these basics to JavaScript, because forming this good solid foundation, understanding all these literals and how to set up the identifiers in them is really going to help with determining and coming up with the logic that you need to be able to produce when you create more complex JavaScript. So building up the base first, and then we're going to get into more complex pieces of JavaScript that are actually going to use all of these literals within them. Within this lesson, we're going to talk about some more interesting stuff that's available within JavaScript. So previously looked at all these different data types, and we look at how to present those and so on. So one of the really cool things is that besides having these actual values here, we can also produce pieces of code to reuse over and over again. So much like we are able to reuse these values over and over again and adjust them throughout JavaScript, there's a way to create a whole block of code and be able to reuse that and execute that whenever we want to have that value executed. And those are what's called functions. So I'm going to set up a very simple function here. I'm going to pass anything through quite yet. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to console log out a value. So maybe I want to just log out this apple AD or something like that. So functions don't actually get rendered out until you call the function. So all you have to do in order to call the function is do something like this. So the way that this is going to run through is that when it reads through all of these values, it's going to take into its cache that apple AB equals strings white space, and it's going to know that whenever it calls apple AB, it'll write this out. It'll read through this function and say, okay, well, when we hit function, my function, we're going to be able to render this out. This piece of code, it's going to run this piece of code when we're calling the function, and then over here it's going to say, okay, well, this is the calling of the function, firing of the function, and then it knows what it needs to do, what code it needs to render out. So this gets saved within the function and gets rendered out within the function. So just to show you how this is going to turn out over here, so we get that same thing here where we're actually rendering out that console log information. along with functions, there's actually several different ways that we can write out functions. And depending on the way that you write it out, so it all actually matters how JavaScript reads through the code. And you got to keep that in mind when you are coming up with which type of function you're going to use. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about all the different ways that you can render out functions. I'm going to talk about two of the most basic ones. So this was a declaration function. And this is the most common use of functions, but there's also expression use of functions. So I could create something like my func here, and I can make it look similar to my declaration of the function, where I've got that function name, and actually I've got to place this on the other side of the equal sign. So we have to actually declare that it is a function. So somewhere along the way it has to indicate that this is a function. So my func is going to be the same thing as my function, and we're going to be able to call it within the same structure. So same thing, we have the ability to pass through arguments over here, and then whatever the function does is between the opening and closing curly brackets. So just to show you how this is going to look, and go down here, and we're going to call this one here as well. So go out and refresh it, and we see that it does the exact same thing, or it looks like it does the exact same thing, but it doesn't actually do the exact same thing, because if I was to move these before the two functions, we're going to actually get a different results here. And then this is one of those things about how JavaScript actually renders it out, that we see that my func is not a function, and it's not throwing that same error for the my function. So if I was to remove that, we're not actually going to get that same error, and it still knows how to render that out. And that's because when we use a declaration function, the way that JavaScript actually reads through the code is that it reads it all once and it places it within the cache. So over here, when it sees this, it doesn't actually take this value as understanding what's held within this function, but when we declare it within this way, it understands that my function now has been listed. It knows that there's a function attached to it, and then the second time when JavaScript runs through the code, it actually starts rendering out the code, what it hits, and when it hits my function, it knows that this is what's being held within there, as opposed to when we're writing the function expression and we don't know that there's actually a function attached to it, and it doesn't know how to render that out. So order of presenting your functions is important, and calling to those functions. So we're going to talk more about functions and get into some really cool stuff as well that's available within JavaScript. Start bringing this all together to create some calculations and something dynamically happening instead of just presenting out all of this static data. And this is where we're going to present what JavaScript really has to offer. It's that dynamic capability of being able to take values, apply logic to it, make calculations, and then return those values as something unique and different that's not presented already within that code. So just working it out from the logic. So that's all coming up in the next lessons. Within this lesson, we're going to talk about JavaScript and how to work with various numbers in JavaScript. So in the previous lessons, we looked at functions, setting some values for the numbers, and sending those over into JavaScript. We also looked at a short form for doing increments, so adding 1. We can also do subtracting, so this is subtracting 1, this is adding 1. We've also got some, besides these basic calculations, so I could always do something instead of a plus b, I could go a times b. Just quickly show you what that's going to look like when I go into the console. So now I get 350 every time it's 350 because we're doing a multiplication. We can also do division and so on. So there's quite a lot of options there that we can do with our JavaScript. So that's just right off the bat basic calculations. So we also have included within JavaScript what's called the math object. And the math object allows us to do more complex calculations as well as bring in complex numbers. So if we did something like A divided by B, or maybe I should do B times 3 divided by A, or something like that. So see what happens here when I go out and I refresh it. So I get this number with, I get this integer with a whole bunch of decimal point and a whole bunch of numbers after that. So built in to JavaScript, there's actually a way to solve that. And to bring it up, we can do something like math ceiling. And this gives us the ability to reformulate this number and bring the integer over into the greatest number that's passed in the argument. So instead of being a 3.5, we get a 6. So it brings it up to the ceiling. So we could also do something like floor. So if I can change this to, instead of ceiling, so what do you think floor is going to do? So if ceiling brings it up to the max, think about if we had a floor and we had 5.3, I think it's 5.3, 5, and floor is going to pull it all the way down to the floor and give us an actual real number without decimal places. So quite a few options there that we do have with JavaScript. We also have what's called a pseudo random number generator. So this is another really cool thing that we can do with JavaScript, and this brings in even more dynamics. So if I had something like variable e and I did math random, so math random, and I'm gonna just console log out that value of e. We're going to notice that every time we get a different value for e. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually multiply, maybe multiply the whole thing by e. So see how that turns out. Take a look at this, refresh. So we get a value for e of this, and so this really doesn't make a lot of sense as a random number, 0 to 1, having this decimal place. But when we actually start bringing together some additional mathematics in there, so if we multiplied it by 1,000 and we use something like math ceiling, now we're going to get a number all the way up to 1,000. So this is going to apply some additional calculations and return a number, I believe, from 0 to 1,000, so 335, 679, 41, and we see that we get a whole bunch of series of random numbers. So if you want something random to happen on your page, this is a great way to set that up within your calculations. So up next, we're going to talk about strings and discuss what we can do with strings. There's also, just like the math, there's some built-in functionality within JavaScript where we can work with the string values and manipulate them. So it's coming up in the next lesson. So within the last lesson, we looked at what we could do with math and what it did to integers. Now there's also some built-in functionality that JavaScript has for strings as well. So we've got a few strings over here, and if you notice that we're using the double quotes here, so we could very well use single quotes as well. But what if we had something like apples or something like that? We see that when we use that single quote again, it actually breaks out of the string. So JavaScript will read first apple, and then it will pick up the next single quote, and then this part here it's not going to understand. So there is a way to break out of that, and this is what this backslash is used for. So this allows us to include single quotes, but they don't get registered as single quotes. They only get read as single quotes within that string context. And this is the same thing to be used in case we're using double quotes, so we can break out of that as well if we need to. So if this was double quoted, we could use those to break out of there. And Also, so that's just one thing about formatting strings. And also within strings, just like we had this math function, we've got some really cool stuff that we can do with strings as well. So first of all, we've got the ability to find out the length of a string. So if I go over here to console, and I'm going to just comment this part out, and we're not going to be using the functions within this example. So if I wanted to find out the length or the number of characters that are available within this particular string element, I can do something like appleab and then just type in length. So length is the built-in function, and this is one of those reserved words as well. We don't want to be defining a variable using length equals whatever. So we don't want to be doing that, and that's because this is predefined, and this is actually going to give us a value of the number of characters that are within this string. So just offhand, I'm seeing roughly around 14. So now I can go out here, refresh it, or I should say 13 characters, because we're starting with 0, so we're getting a total of 13 there. So length 13, so that's 11, 12, and this backslash isn't getting counted. So there we have our 13. So if we were to remove out this, go back out and refresh it, so now we've got 12, because we simply removed back the backslash, and then that single quote was the one that was being counted there. We can also do things like replace. So we could have a built-in function where we do something like variable h and set that to, and we're going to use that appleab as well within this example. So what we want to do is we want to use this built-in function called replace, and now we have to indicate what we want to replace. So maybe I want to replace first, and the string that I want it to replace with is going to be new. And I'm going to just console log out that. I'll keep the length there just to show you that now we're going to have a new calculation, so we're going to have a new length there. Refresh it, and we see we've got the first apples, we still have that length there. And that's right, we gave it a value of h, so h would have to be the one that we're working with. So we'd update those to h, refresh it, and we see that with the replace worked. It replaced that word with new and updated the count as well, because we're actually looking at this new value of appleab using strength or replace. So also we do have other built-in functions such as slice. So we can actually do a slice on it where we can do an h and slice. And this is the position where we're going to slice at. So starting position of the first character is where we're going to slice h. So see how that turns out. So we removed away the first character, which was n. So we can also provide an end in there as well. So we just comma separate that out, and maybe we could do something like 5, and that would pick up those characters and it would slice it at the end of 5. So starting at 1 position, so we had our first letter n, starting there, so we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another slice there to remove out that the rest of the content. So essentially we could slice out and pull out that content. We've got another one that we can use as well. So I'm going to just copy this over so that we have it within the resource section when I save all these different options that we have with strings. So the next one we have is substring, and substring works the same way as the slice. So we're just going to keep opposite as the slice. So just show you the way that works, and we see that we've got that extra number in there because of our starting and finishing position. So what it does, it actually includes it. If we want to change all of our case, maybe if we want to change it all to lowercase, so we can do that as well within these built-in functions. So if we want to take, I'm going to take apple AB, and I'm going to update this to first, and update that to apples, and maybe we just change something like that. And so we have the ability to change it to lowercase. So all it is 2 lowercase. And just show you what comes out there. So we actually, it's putting the function in there. So I have to actually, this one's going to be slightly different, where I have to, instead of the length, it works the same way as the slice and the substring, where I need to have those brackets in there. And now when I do it, I can actually see that it does transform it to lowercase. We can also transform to uppercase as well. So lowercase, all uppercase. And there's a few other built-in methods as well that we can use. But for the most part, these are the most common ones that you'd be using within strings. So in the next lesson, we're going to talk more about what we can do within our JavaScript, and we're going to be looking in more detail about arrays and how arrays work within JavaScript. So that's coming up in the next lesson. In the first few lessons, we did briefly touch upon arrays, and we showed how we can actually create arrays. So we had set up a simple array called myArray. We had a couple, 3 different items in there. So when you are creating an array, if you don't immediately have the values that you want to use for the array, you could initiate it by just doing something like new array. And this lets the browser know that you're planning to use this value for an array value. And then in order to add items into the array, you can define items numerically. So we could start out with 0, and we could just have something like 1. We could also skip key values. So we could start something like 5, and then our length of our array is actually going to increase considerably. So if I list out what the array looks like at this point, so move all of that stuff down, and I'm going to just simply list the array within the console. So refresh that, and we see that we've got our array there. So the first item is 0 by default, and then 5 is going to return the value of 5. So that's how we can define what the keys are, as well as the values of an array. And then of course, this is essentially shorthand for that, so assigning everything in one place. So with arrays, we can actually have essentially have arrays within arrays. So I can even make this one even more complex. So I could have a set of, they're going to be identical here, but we can comma separate that out. And maybe I should update some of these values. So I'm going to just change A, B, and 7 so that they're different. So now within my array, we actually have an array within an array. So I'll just show you how this looks when we output it. And so we have an array within an array. So here we've got all of these under item 0. So this would be the first array, and then this is the second array that's nested within the main array. And now we're going to show you how to access the various values. So within this array, if I want to access 5, all I have to do is call to that particular key. So this nested array is going to be a little bit more complex, because the first bracketed section is going to refer to the array that we want to get to. So what if I want it to display B? What would I have to include my array here? So when we look at this calculation, we see that this is the second item. So arrays start with 0, so 1 is the second item in the array, and then I'm going to also have to select which value I want to pick up from this array, and again it's going to be the second one. So this should return back 5, and then this part should return back B. So just go out and refresh it, and we see that we do have 5, we do have B returned back. So we can do things like combining arrays. So if I've got a few arrays and if I want to merge them together, I can do that as well, and that's the concat method. So that's just concat like that, and we can bring two arrays together. So I'm going to actually try to combine this array, and I'm going to combine it with itself. So we'll see if that works, and I'll just define it within there. And maybe I'm going to set up a brand new value here so that we can easier pick that out. And I'm going to console log I. So see if this works. So it should actually be concatenating those arrays together. So I'm going to refresh it, and we see that it did bring them together. So we got 1, 5, 1, 5, 5, and then value number 6 is 1 again, and value 11 is 5. So key value 5, key value 6, and then it added that same increment because the rest of them are still there. The rest of those items are still there even though they're not visible. So whatever the key value is, if 11 is our highest, we have all the way from 0 to 11 that we can select upon. We can also join and split arrays, and we can remove items from arrays. So just as we were placing items in it, if we want to place something within an array, just show you how to do that. So if I want to bring something and place it within the array, I can push items into that array. So I'm just going to put this number in there, go back out and refresh it. So we actually have it twice because we're still concatenating the arrays. So I can also remove out of the array. So that's pushing that in, and maybe we'll remove out something out of this array. So this value 5, and this is going to be unshift. And sorry, unshift actually, it's not removing it out. Unshift actually adds the item into the beginning of the array. So this one pushed these ones over and added that 5 in the beginning. So we also have shift, which I'll show you what that one does as well. So if we shift 5, shift does is it actually removed the first one, so we still have the rest of the items within that array. So getting familiar with arrays is going to be another one of those crucial skills to work with in JavaScript effectively, because there's, just like the other ones where you've got these values containing these variables and strings and integers, so working with arrays really does help you manage the data and move things around and store data effectively within JavaScript. So far we've been laying out the basic foundation of JavaScript and how to start working and start coming up with that logic that you want applied. So you actually want something to happen. You don't want to just put a bunch of values in and then pull those same values out. You can do that within HTML. So that's not exactly what we're going to be using JavaScript for. And this is the part where things start getting interesting. So we had introduced functions, and with functions you can do a lot of really cool things with functions. So one of them, so we're going to keep this code as it is, and one of them with functions is they have the ability to create their own local scope, so a local value. So if I was to do something like var apple AB within here, and then I'm doing this out here. So what do you think is actually going to get displayed in the console log? If we notice here, we're hitting the console log twice, once from invoking this function, it's going to run through here, and the second time it's just a general console log of the Apple AB variable. So what do you think is going to get put out into the console log, and in what order is it going to get presented? So do you think it's just going to say, I'm going to rename this to first Apple. So do you think it's going to say first Apple, first Apple, first Apple, new Apple, new Apple, new Apple, error? What do you think the combination is going to be? So when I refresh it, it says new Apple, first Apple. And I'm going to run through why this is. So we notice that we've applied first Apple over here and new Apple within the function. And this is what's called local scope, because we only have access to this Apple AB value within the local scope. And that's locally within this function itself. So when I call to my function, when I trigger that to run, it runs function, it sees, okay, Apple AB is now contains a value of new Apple, and this is a brand new variable that's being identified here, brand new string. And when it console logs that out, it's going to take this brand new one, because this is happening locally. If this is not available, then it's going to look for any global values of Apple AB, and then it will return first Apple. Whereas over here, it's completely unaware of what's happened within this function, because this is all working locally, and it has no idea that I'm looking for Apple AB that's available within the function, and it's only aware of Apple AB that was declared here right in the beginning, and this is what's known as a global value. So some of the things that you can do with functions, there's quite a lot more actually we can do with functions. We can do things like we can pass arguments, we can pass multiple arguments, and I'll just show you how that works. So if I had something like a value of 4 and a value of 5, and I'm also going to put a string in there. So I'm going to put ABC. This is actually going to give me access to ABC. So I'm going to concatenate it together, put some spacing in there, and show you the value of A, and copy this out. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. Should have copied that plus sign as well, and plus C. So this will write out all of these values. So what do you think is going to happen here when we console log this value out? It's going to take in these arguments. It looks like I'm kind of assigning these values to there. So what do you think we're going to be presented with in the console? When I refresh it, we see that we've got first Apple. So this is that Apple AB value, and then A, B, and C. And those are the values that we've passed in from the my function. So this can actually be entirely different if I have something like 14, and okay, I'm getting lazy here, but just running through the values, and I'm going to just put something like new, and going back out, refreshing it, and we see that this old function actually does something entirely different. It returns an entirely different set of values. So now we can begin to see that we're getting this something dynamic happening here, and I can even go as far as declaring a brand new value of D here and doing something like A plus B. And instead of having A plus B, so maybe we could turn this into a mathematical formula and just completely disregard C and change it to D. So what do you think is going to happen here? And I'm going to get rid of this one as well, because we don't need to illustrate that anymore. So what do you think is going to show up in the console log now? And comment that out as well. So another thing that we don't need. So here we have our mathematical worked out. So 4 plus 5 equals 9, 14 plus 25 equals 39. So really cool what we can do with these functions. And so additionally, I'm going to create a brand new function, totally different function, call it function A. I'm going to comment all of this out. And now I'm going to call to the function. But this time, I'm going to actually invoke something completely different here, which is going to be really interesting, because I'm just going to do something called return. So I'm going to be returning a value over to this function. So what do you think is going to happen here when I do 14 plus or 1425 new? So these values are going to get passed in here, and it says it's returning D. So what does that mean? When we go out here, so what do you think is going to show up in the console here on that return? And if you said nothing, you're correct, because we're not actually outputting this returned value. So in order to output it, we're going to go back to our handy console log, remove that second quote there. Not sure why I didn't copy all of it in there, but console log. And now, because we're actually writing it out into the console, when I refresh it, I see that I get this value of 39. So this is a calculated value of whatever values are coming in here. So what if I was to take this one step further and I did something like f equals 14 and variable g equals 25, and instead of passing the values in here, I did f and I did g. And I'm actually going to get rid of this new because we completely don't need it. So now I hope you're seeing that we've got this dynamic thing happening where we're not predefining the values there, we're defining them up here, and this gives us the ability to actually work with these values. So what I can do now is I can even increment f. I can increment g, and these are just adding 1 to it. And I'm going to just write this out a whole bunch of times. So do you think that I'm going to see the same value 6 times? Do you think I'm going to see something different? When I refresh it, we see that it's actually adding those values. So there's no numbers that equal 49 together, but when we look back on our code, that f and g keep increasing every time we call a function. So f is no longer equal to 14, it would be equal to 19, I believe, because we've hit it 5 times, and then the next time we're running through, because we're passing f and g in here, even though it increments here, we haven't taken that increment in the values that we're passing. So it's taking the initial values that's got stored in the memory for f and g and passing them over, reading them as a and b, and then f and g are actually increasing, but we've still got those old values for a and b. So when we pass this in, f has a value of 19 and g has a value of 30, so together they're going to equal 49. So this does take some time to kind of get your head around and how this is all working within the functions, and this is the beginning of creating some dynamic functionality with JavaScript. So I do encourage you to take a look through the source, update some of the functions, try it out for yourself, see what you can make it do, see what calculations you can make it do, and really get a feel and a hang for how to use functions within JavaScript, because these are going to be a really important, integral part of understanding how to use JavaScript effectively. So coming up, we're going to dive even deeper into the cool dynamic functionality and the dynamic functional world of JavaScript with some really neat things and adding additional options for applying logic within our code, updating these variables, and so on. So it's all coming up in the next lessons. The previous lesson we looked at arrays. Within this lesson I want to talk more about objects. So just like arrays, it's a great way to store multiple values within one container here, and with objects we have the ability to store multiple properties for that. So here we've got the my object, so this could very well be a person or a customer or something like that. So I'm going to update this to my customer, so that makes a little bit more sense. So if you've got multiple customers and you want to identify what this customer, what the information on this particular customer is, an array is a perfect example of how we can do that. So with arrays or with objects, when we look at it, we see that these are paired values. So we've got this first key value, and then, or the name, and then we've got the actual value. So again, the name of the key, and then the value, name of the key, and then the value. And this is how we can retrieve that data as well. So if we wanted to pull out actual information such as the person's name, so I'm going to actually hide some of these console logs that we were looking at earlier so that we don't have too much stuff that's showing up. I think that I got to get rid of some of these as well that we are looking at for the arrays. So now we should clear up that console log. And if I actually want to display information that's available within my object, so all I have to do is use the object name. So my object name is my customer, and then I can do a period and select any one of these values that's here. So if I want age, email, name, and these are the same ones that I have available here. So if I wanted this person's name, for instance, I could display it in this type of format. So if I actually wanted to do this, there's several different ways to do this as well. So another option for accessing the object properties is to do these kind of square brackets. So similar to what we were doing with arrays, and then we just pick out the name there that we wanted to use. So when I go back out here, this should actually display the same information because this is just two ways to access the property values. And when you get more into JavaScript, the reasons for having these two different ways of accessing object information is going to become a lot more relevant. Just for now, it's just important to understand that there are two different ways in order to pull out that property information from your objects when you're working with objects. And most commonly, depending on how you're structured with your content and how you need to retrieve it, one way might work better than the other. For the most part, I just use this type of format where I just do the period and then the name. And then of course you've always got to be cognizant, so if you have something you don't want to have spacing in there as well, because that's not going to translate well within when you're pulling out that content. And this one would format better for that type of instance. And also when you're updating stuff dynamically in JavaScript and you do need to have this dynamic value that's changing, you could use it within this format as well. So within the source code that I'm providing throughout the course, I've got links up here at the top to CodePen.io repositories. So if you go to the CodePen.io and if you don't see anything happening, you just see the JavaScript in there, just remember that to push console, and this is going to actually give you all of that information here, allowing it to pop up within the console. So when you're working with all of these values, it's all contained within the console, and that's what we're outputting as well when we're looking at the course. So now I wanted to talk about different operators that we can use to do comparisons, and this is going to lead into conditions. So what conditions are is they're actually statements to check if a condition is true or false. So they're written out in, I'm going to remove out quite a lot of this stuff here because we don't really need a lot of this information. So over here I'm going to do a really simple condition. So if app equals 2, then I want to output something to the console log. And close that up. Actually, that semicolon should be inside of there, so close that up. So basically it says if app, the value of app, is equal to 2, and if this is true, then it's going to do this. So I can go out and refresh this, and it says it's 2. If I change the value to 3, go back out, this condition is no longer true and nothing shows up. So we have the option for conditional statements to do add even more logic into there. So we can do something like else. So if it's not true, then not 2, because 2 is the value that we're actually checking for. Go back out and we see that it's not 2. Now there's a few things to keep in mind when you are doing these conditional statements, and it comes to when we talk about operators, comparison operators. So the 2 equal signs is simply equal to. We have the 1 equal sign here that sets the value, 2 does a check to see if it's equal to. But it's actually not checking to see if the type is that same type. So if I have something like app equals to, and if you remember from what we learned earlier, that when we have quotes around it, it doesn't stay as an integer, it turns into a string. But over here I'm checking to see if app is equal to 2 of a value of 2. So does this mean that we're able to read the numeric value that's contained within that string? And if it actually equals 2, then we go through and we do this comparison. So it should equal 2, and what do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to be able to check even though the types are different? And if you said yes, it's true that even though the types are different, when we have the 2 equal signs, it's actually going to return back true, and it did. So this is where best format is usually to use 3 equal signs, and this is an absolute equivalent. So that means that this also includes the type. So this type is a string, this one is an integer, so now when I refresh it, it's no longer going to be true. So keeping that in mind, there's a bunch of other ones as well. So we can do something like not equal to, and this is going to take a look at the type as well. So I'm going to switch this back to something like 5, and now we can do a greater than. We also have less than, we have greater than or equal to, and we've got a whole bunch of these conditions that we can set, all these different operators. So it is greater than or equal to, so we can add that in. Now additional to that, we can run several additional checks in there as well. So we can add in these logical operators to make sure that if app is greater than or equal to 2, then it's true, but we also want to make a check to see if f is equal to 14. And I'm going to change this to true, and I'm going to change this to false. So that makes more sense when we see the output there. So now both of these conditions need to be true in order for true to be shown. So they are both true, and if I was to change this to 18 or something like that, it's no longer going to show up true, it's going to show up false. So what we can do here is we've got some other choices. So we've got an and, we've got an or. So if either one of these is true, then it's going to show up as true, because at least one of them is true. So there's a bunch of different options here with the logical operators and the different comparisons that we can do. So getting back and switching back into the conditions, so this is our typical condition where we're checking to see if this condition is met. If it's not met, then we continue on. We don't show this part. If it is met, then we do show that part. We can also add in additional checks, so we can do something like else if g equals 25. Then we do that, and we can just leave it. We don't need to add an additional else, or we can add an additional else if we wanted. If we so choose to, we could have another else here and show something if none of those conditions are met. Nothing. And yes, it does get fairly complex with the logic. So that's why it's always good to practice this out and really think it through how you want to present the logic of the application that you're presenting or the content that you're looking at in order to make the proper checks and make sure that the results come out the way as planned. So in the next lesson, we're going to be talking about loops. So loops are another one of those integral parts of JavaScript applications where it allows you to, again, save time, and a lot of these things, it's just a matter of saving time, creating these dynamic functionalities within JavaScript, and loops are another one of those that allow you to save time. So we're going to be going over that in the upcoming lesson. So in one of the previous lessons, we were outputting console log a whole bunch of times. We were doing some calculations with the functions, and we were outputting console log a whole ton of times. So we had something like, we had a function, and I'm going to actually bring back one of those old functions because it's going to make it a lot easier for us to write through this code. So we had a function, and we were passing maybe a value there. We were incrementing f, and we were console logging that information out, and then we were just simply calling, I believe, to the function. So I had something like a plus f or something like that I was console logging out. So this one, I'm just going to simply do the my function, and I'm going to have a 5, and if I want to run this a whole bunch of times, see what turns out here. And we see that within the console log, we see this repeating. But one of the problems was that I had to actually output this a whole bunch of times, and which was all fine because I was just simply able to copy and paste. But what if you don't have copy and paste? What if you're working at something more complex calculations? You don't want to be going in, rewriting this, updating the argument here that we're passing, and so on. So that's where we get loops. And loops allow us to, as the name implies, loop through values. So I'm going to set a value for I, and I'm going to do a check to see if I is less than 10. So this is the amount of times I'm going to loop through. So you always need to have something that's going to break you out of the loop. And this is why usually I like to format it this way. There's several different ways to write loops. So I can do something like my function, and output it in this type of format, and we see that we do get that same look that we had, but there's a lot less code being written. And that's also one of those things that you definitely want to do, is you want to write less and less code. So I can even do something like I, and have it incrementing by 2 now, or it should be incrementing by 2. And there's quite a few different options that I can do. So I had that f increasing, so it started out at 14, it keeps increasing every time I run the function, and over here I keeps incrementing as well because I've got that I plus plus 1, which we had seen before. So this is a great reason to save time when you're creating these types of loops. You can also do loops when looping through content. So if I wanted to loop through all these different items here I have in the array, so I'm actually going to simplify that, or maybe I can just do it this way. So I have more items in my array. I'm just going to remove out the second brackets, so that looks okay. Just do a quick beautify of it to make it more readable and presentable. So the same thing if I wanted to loop through and check all the different items that are available. Or maybe actually it's probably better if we just do it with an object. So I'm going to add some additional values here in this object. Just thinking of an easy way to do that. And it doesn't look like there's that easy of a way to do this. Of course, I could use a loop to add in stuff into here dynamically, but to illustrate what we're doing here, if I wanted to loop through all the values in my customer, I can do that with a loop as well. So I'm going to do for, set a variable that we can use to contain this. So a quick glance to see where I'm at. Maybe I'll just use something like m. So setting up that variable so I can make use of it. So I can do m in, and the name of that object is my customer. And this is where we can actually output our content. So I'm going to just console log it out. So we're going to have a whole bunch of entries of the console log. And over here, so I'm just selecting every single one of those for m in my customer, so it'll loop through all the different available items or entries or values in that object. It'll loop through every single one, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, loop through everything. Notice that I don't have to set where it's ending because it's going to automatically understand that it's hit the end of that object. There's nothing else for it to deliver to output. And m is just a value that we're going to be using. So customer square brackets m will output that content. So there we have it here in the right hand side. So John, my at email 20, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So these are really good functionalities when you've got a lot of items in order to look through. And that's a really good reason to use loops. There's different types of loops as well. So there's a while loop, which is a more simplified version. So we don't have to have as many arguments available within that loop. So I can do something like j is less than 20. And then here I just enter in that content what I want to happen. So over here I was doing the my function maybe I'll do my function j just to be consistent. And the one thing when you're doing whiles, and one of the reasons I prefer to do these for loops is because over here you still have to have that increment. Otherwise this condition will never be met, and you'll never be able to hit that value in order to break out of the loop. So you'll be caught in an endless loop. So j is not defined. So again, format has to be the same as what we did over here where we define I. So a simplified for loop, we still have to define j, looping through j. Unless we're using j in another value already, we have to define it and then do the while loop. So now when I've given a value for j, and actually I'm going to set a starting value for j, go back out and refresh it, and we see that once I set that starting value for j, we do have that increment all the way up. So it runs it through every single time 20 times until the loop is finished. You can also set default breaks here if you want to break out of the loop. So if I do something like break, this should only run this one time now. So we see that it ran it one time and it broke the loop. We also have an option to continue. So this is if you're doing more customized looping through content and you really need to isolate out those values. So if it hits a break, you can do something, and then when it has completed, then you can hit continue as well. So quite a lot you can do with loops, and it's definitely another one of those things that's worth practicing and worth getting familiar with working with loops. And I'm going to provide the source code that I've used here as well. And again, it is worthwhile to take a look through and try out these different conditions, see what you can make happen, and the different logic that you can apply to it, as well as the different looping mechanisms that are available within JavaScript. So again, I'm going to